It's Miss Christy, and we're here in Genesis Junction. And I just wanted to remind you of your two memory verses. Isaiah 30:18 is for the older class, the Durango drivers. And Ephesians 2:4-5 is for the Adirondack Mountaineers. Now remember, if you send me a video or a voice recording, or you just call me on the phone and recite the memory verse for me, then your name is going to be put into a drawing. And at the end of December, on the last Sunday, which would normally be birthday Sunday, we are going to draw from a hat, and someone is going to win this puzzle. Isn't this adorable? It's the nativity scene with baby Jesus, but all around him are puppies and kitties and the animals of the stable. Very fun to do with your family. So, let me hear you say those memory verses, and your name will go in the drawing for that. Okay? Let's review our Bible truths. And the first one is, because God is just, He must do what when we sin? What's that? Yes, He must punish us. He must punish us. But what word means that God may not punish us, even though we deserve it? What is that word? It is mercy. Yes, good job. Mercy. And can we trust God all the time? Yes, we can, because He is faithful, right? And finally, what word, the big O word, means that God knows all things, right? He knows everything. Yes, that big word is omniscient. All right, good job. Now, you'll probably notice that it's a little bit dark in here, and that's because we have this little campfire right here. And we're going to talk about fire today in our lesson. So let's review what we talked about last week in case you didn't join us. And if you didn't, I can still get you the paperwork, and you can still go back and watch the lesson, because all of our lessons here in Genesis Junction go one upon the other, upon the other, upon the other, because we walk through the Bible. We walk through God's Word, our history, and every bit of it is important, because there is a lesson to learn in there. So last week, do you remember what was happening here? Okay. Last week, we learned about 4 young men who were taken to a different country called Babylon. Remember, Judah had been captured by the Babylonians because they were not following God, right? Just as all the prophets had told them what's going to happen. So these 4 young men were taken. Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah were chosen to be servants of King Nebuchadnezzar. He wanted them to forget about their home back in Judah and to forget about their God, the one true God. So he gave them new names. He gave them Babylonian names. He changed their names to Belteshazzar, Meshach, Abednego, and Shadrach. Okay? He changed their names. And we talked about that last week, how we would feel if someone changed our names. These young men would not eat the food from the king's table because they wanted to be obedient to God. But after a test, they were allowed to eat only vegetables and drink water. God rewarded their obedience by giving them great knowledge and skill and wisdom. Daniel was also given the special gift of understanding dreams. All 4 men became important servants to King Nebuchadnezzar. We'll learn more about them today. So, as we start our lesson, I have a question for you. How many of you have toasted a marshmallow before? How many of you have? Oh, yes, like to make a s'more or just to eat it just like it is. But toasting marshmallows is fun over a fire, isn't it? Well, this is a raw marshmallow right here, one that's not cooked. And some people like to eat them just like that, kind of plain or barely over the fire. But there's a way, my favorite way to roast your marshmallow, so it's just right. And it takes a lot of patience. You have to sit here and turn it. You have to hold it in just the right spot. Keep it away from the flame, which is really hot, and just so it gets nice and toasty brown. This is the way I like it. Who likes it nice and toasty brown? Who likes them raw? Well, there is one other way you can cook a marshmallow. And I know some people that like it that way, but not me. That's burnt all to crisp, right? They just stick their marshmallow right down in the fire and they let it catch on fire. Then they spend half the time blowing it out. And then it's so hot that you usually have to wait for it to cool back down before you can even eat it. And then sometimes they end up peeling all the black, hard, charcoal-y bit off of the outside. So, depending on how close you are to the fire, is how much you can get burnt by the flames. Because we know, we've all been taught since we were little, that fire is hot. Yes, and that we must stay away from it or be very careful. And we never play around with fire, do we? So I'm going to put my little marshmallows right here by my fire. I can't wait to eat that middle one later. It's just right. Okay. Well, today we are going to talk about David's friends. Okay. And something that happened to them. All right. So, fire is powerful. So it must be used safely or it can be very dangerous. But God gave us fire as a helpful tool. People have used fire for cooking and for lighting in their homes. We use fire for heat if you have a wood stove, or right now if we're out camping and we want to get warm. In our lesson, King Nebuchadnezzar used fire to scare people into obeying him and actually doing something wrong. Let's find out what happened. So we are going to go to our Bibles, okay? And we're going to go back to Daniel where we were last week. So let's go to Daniel and go to chapter 3. Okay? And We are going to read verse 1 in chapter 3. And it says, "Now King Nebuchadnezzar had a gold statue made. The statue was 90 feet tall and 9 feet wide. He set up the statue on the plain of Dura in the area of Babylon." So let's see. So what did the king set up? He set up a statue. Look at this big statue right here. And it was all made out of gold and other metals. And see how tiny the people are down there? Because this statue was really big. So this image or statue was 90 feet tall and 9 feet wide. And it may have been a statue that looked just like King Nebuchadnezzar. He was a proud king who ruled over the kingdom. So he might have made this statue to show off like his proud stature and how strong his kingdom was and his army and how he's taken over so many things, right? King Nebuchadnezzar gave a command that whenever there was special music played, everyone must bow down, drop to their knees, bow down in the direction of that statue. But what would happen if people didn't obey this command, right? Because are we supposed to bow down to idols, to statues? No, we're not. We are only to bow down and pray to the one true God. Yes. So let's read verse 6 and find out what would happen if someone did not obey the king's command. Okay, so in verse 6 it says, "You will hear the sound of the horns, flutes, lyres, zithers, harps, pipes, and all the other musical instruments. When this happens, you must bow down and worship the gold statue. This is the one King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Everyone must bow down and worship this gold statue. Anyone who doesn't will be quickly thrown into a blazing furnace." Do you know what a furnace is? You probably have a furnace in your house, right? Might be down in the basement, or it might be in a closet somewhere. But that is what makes the heat for your home. But this furnace was unlike any furnace we have today. This would incinerate, or whatever you would put in there would burn up in an instant. It was kept so hot. So that sounds terrible, doesn't it? That he was going to put people in the furnace. So basically he was going to burn them alive. Yeah, that's not good. We just talked about fire and what it can do. And the people were so afraid that they would be killed, that they would be thrown into this furnace, that they obeyed King Nebuchadnezzar and they bowed down to his statue. But not Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, not Daniel's friends. They wanted to obey God and only him. Now, there were some Babylonians that didn't like them. They didn't like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego so much. They were kind of jealous because the king liked those boys, even though they weren't real Babylonians. They were Jewish boys. So they went to the king with a plan. They kind of tricked the king into making a decree that said that if they don't bow down to the statue again, they will get thrown into the fiery furnace. Now the king, he liked those boys. He knew they were blessed by God, even though he didn't worship God. He could see it in them, and they were smart and strong, right? So he liked them. So he was going to give them one more chance. He said, please bow down, because he can't go against himself, the king. He already made this command to bow down or else. Well, he kind of has to go through with his or else. So he gave the decree one more time, hoping that the boys would obey, because he did not want to throw them in. Well, those men that went to the king, they were spying on the boys to see if they were disobeying their God. But what do you think happened? What do you think happened? Did Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, did they cave? Did they fear for their life? Did they fear that they would be thrown into the fire and die, so they bowed down to this statue, this idol, this false god? Or do you think they prayed only to God and remained faithful to God? What do you think? Well, let's find out what happened. All right. So, these brave men answered the king when he said, I'm going to give you one more chance. But they said, O king, we know that our God will save us. We will not bow to your statue. The king was so mad. He shouted, guards, make the furnace 7 times hotter than what it was, and tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and throw them in. So they tied their hands and tied their feet. So let's listen to what happened to them, okay? Let's go back to chapter 3 and go over to verses 22 and 23 and see what happens. The king was very angry when he gave the command, and the furnace was made very hot. The fire was so hot that the flames killed the strong soldiers who brought Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to the furnace. Firmly tied, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego fell into the blazing furnace. They went in. They fell into the flames. But God, right? Let's see what happened next. All right. Can you see this picture right here? As King Nebuchadnezzar looked into the furnace, he saw something very surprising. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were walking around in there. They weren't tied up anymore, and they weren't being hurt by the fire. Then the king noticed there was another man in there with them. The Bible doesn't say exactly who this man was. He might have been the Son of God, Jesus, or he could have been an angel. Whoever it was, God had sent him to protect the three friends from the blazing fire. Wow! So they were thrown into this flame, this furnace. It was so hot, it had already killed other people. And they were walking around, and there was a fourth person. They threw 3 bodies in there, and when the king looked in there, he saw 4. So now we know that if our marshmallows get too close to the fire, what's going to happen? Yeah, this. It's going to get black, and it's going to get all yucky and dried to a crisp and probably smell really smoky. Like if you've had a campfire and the next day you get up and yeah, you can still smell the smoke on you because it's very strong. Well, but when the king, then he called the men to come out of the furnace. They weren't hurt at all, not one bit. Their clothes weren't burnt. Their hair didn't smell like smoke. That was a miracle that only God could do. King Nebuchadnezzar was amazed. He could see that God was very powerful. Still, he had a lot to learn about how powerful and omnipotent and sovereign that God really was, or really is. One night, sometime later, Nebuchadnezzar had Daniel come up to his room because he had a strange dream. And that dream really worried King Nebuchadnezzar. And he knew that Daniel was given that gift. God gave him the gift to interpret dreams. King Nebuchadnezzar told Daniel, he said, "In my dream, I saw an enormous tree. And it reached way up to heaven. It had beautiful leaves and so much fruit. All the living creatures could eat from it. Animals rested in its shade, and birds lived in its branches." Wow, doesn't that sound nice? That doesn't sound anything to be worried about, right? But then, the king continued, an angel came and said, "Chop this tree down. The tree stump that's left will live in the grass with the animals and have the mind of a beast for 7 years." That's kind of weird that a tree stump can act like an animal. So King Nebuchadnezzar wasn't sure what that meant, so he called for Daniel. Daniel explained to the king that the birds and the animals living under the tree were the many, many people in King Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom. Chopping the tree down meant that King Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom was going to be taken away from him. And instead of the king staying in his palace, the king would have to live in the fields like a beast. This would be King Nebuchadnezzar's punishment for having so much pride. He thought he was so great, but he was full of sin. I mean, he was a great king. He built temples and beautiful buildings, and he had waterfalls and gardens, and he had created so many things. Babylon definitely was a beautiful kingdom. But the king was not humble about it. He prided himself, and he was very sinful. And of course, he still ruled over and made those decisions about the Jewish people and any other captives that he took from battles over those people. So, a year later, King Nebuchadnezzar looked out over his beautiful kingdom with all those wonderful things in his great city. And let's see what he was thinking. So this is a year after he had the dream and had Daniel come and tell him what the dream meant. So we're going to go to Daniel chapter 6 and find out what the king was thinking. Or chapter 4, chapter 4, verse 30. And this is what the king was thinking. He said, "Look at Babylon. I built this great city. It is my palace. I built this great place by my power to show how great I am." Well, it's pretty obvious what he was thinking, wasn't it? I, my, me. That's not good, is it? No. He was not thinking about others at all. He was still full of pride. Suddenly, he heard a voice from heaven saying, "Nebuchadnezzar, your kingdom has been taken away. You will live like an animal until you know that God is the ruler over all things." Now, who do you think that voice was? Who do you think that voice was? Yes, it was the Lord, right? Immediately, Nebuchadnezzar's dream came true. He couldn't think like a man anymore. So he went away and lived like an animal in the fields. His hair and nails grew long, and he probably looked wild and scary. For 7 years, Nebuchadnezzar lived with the animals and ate grass like an ox. When he finally lifted his eyes up to God, his mind came back to him, and he praised God. Nebuchadnezzar finally understood that only God is sovereign. He is in complete control of everything. Then God gave the kingdom back to Nebuchadnezzar. So God showed his great glory when he saved Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fire. He showed his great power over Nebuchadnezzar, right? As he took his kingdom away and made him humble by making him live like an animal. He had to break that pride, right? It took a horrible punishment to make him understand that God is in control of everything. Right? And what is that word? That God is in control. It's been one of our vocabulary words, and it's on that attribute poster. Yes, sovereign. God is in control. sovereign. So that is our lesson from Daniel this week. And next week we are going to talk about Daniel again with another exciting story, how God showed his glory to them. So let's see what your homeworks are. And then Miss Christie was going to finish eating her marshmallows. And then I got to put my fire out and probably need to go home because it's starting to get dark. So God defends his glory. And that's what this lesson is. So for the Durango drivers, here's your take-home sheet. There's a coloring sheet of the big statue. And there is a coloring sheet, but it has 9 hidden pictures in here of when the young men were in the fiery furnace. So down here in the box, there's the hidden pictures that you can try to find in the big picture, okay? And then there is the coloring sheet that has to do with Justin and Jesse's story, if you want to read that with your parents during the week. The memory verse is on here, and so remember to practice that so we can get your name in the drawing for the puzzle. And for the older class, for the Durango drivers, you have a couple more verses to read. It'll go into more detail about what we talked about, because there's a lot to those 2 stories. And all you have to do is circle the right word that's true, because there's a true word and a false word, and you just have to circle the one that's true. And there is a coloring sheet of the young men in the fire there too. And on the take-home, there is a crossword puzzle, a memory verse to practice. You fill in the blank, it'll help you practice it. Besides the song, the new song for the Colossians for the Durango Driver verse is on our Facebook page, so check that out. That one had a lot of drums in it. That was a fun beat. Okay? So, I look forward to seeing you soon. I'm just going to enjoy this campfire for a little bit longer. Oh yes, I'm going to toast this marshmallow just right. Okay? Goodbye. We'll see you later.